And we're back with episode 2 of the Unleash California podcast. My name is Mike Umbro, your host, energy entrepreneur, and founder of Californians for Energy and Science, trying to educate you, the average Californian, on why we pay the highest gasoline prices in the country. What we have today is a special guest, Professor Michael Mische from the USC Marshall School of Business. He'll be on telling us why we have the highest prices in the country, which we talked about in the first episode. We've got an Iran global crisis going on. The Strait of Hormuz has been shut. California has never produced such low quantities of crude oil in the state's history. We've never permitted fewer oil and gas wells in the state's history, yet we then culminate things with a knockdown, drag-out battle between Governor Newsom and Chevron, one of the largest companies ever to be born in the state of California, that has fled for the sanctuary state of Texas. And we're going to talk about why California and the policies in Sacramento are driving companies out of this state, why they're driving you and I into bankruptcy through unmatched climate fees, state taxes, and other fees at our gas pump that are funneling billions of dollars every year to the high-speed rail, to affordable housing, to projects that we don't know where the money's going. We don't know how it's being spent, but we know one thing for sure. We are paying for it as consumers, and our bank accounts are being drained. So joining us now is Professor Michael Mische from the Marshall School of Business at University of Southern California. I'm honored to know him and have gotten to know him over the years from our mutual interest in California energy policy. With that, Professor, please give us a brief introduction on yourself and what you're known for in this state. I think most is the famous or infamous $8 gasoline study. So maybe from there work back and tell us a little bit about you and your history in the space.
Well, Mike, that's a hell of a place to start. Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you, and of course, likewise, it's a pleasure to know you and an absolute honor to work with you on many of these things. It's always great to work with my friend Mike Umbro on anything. So, hey, I'm Michael Mische. I'm a professor at the University of Southern California. Prior to that, well, I've been at USC 29 years, but part of that was also corresponded with the time I was a partner at KPMG. I began my career on Wall Street. I fell in love with the oil and gas industry, believe it or not, a long time ago, 1973, when I was a student at NYU. Studying economics, and the great first oil shock hit the United States in October '73, and I happened to have an incredible opportunity to work with one of the brilliant energy economists of the time by the name of Alexander Melamed, and he pulled me under his wings, and I began to learn this industry, and as a trained economist, it's a love affair, because if you keep the government out, it is absolute pure market dynamics of supply and demand. So it's a little bit about me. Thanks again for having me. Yeah,
that's great. I share a little bit of that background from the finance side, and then you just fall in love with the industry and free market principles, and you see what can be, but then also what results when government interference takes over. And here we are today with the highest prices in the country in California, and we're all wondering why this is happening. So part of me is excited that the public is interested in this topic. Part of me is saddened that we've gotten to this point.
No question. I did that economic model last year, which was a follow-up to a 50-year study I did in California energy gasoline prices. And that 50-year study really concluded there was no price gouging by the major refiners. I mean, we can explain all the price spikes. They're normal. There's no anomalies. There was no indication of price gouging at all, indicated in that study over 50 years. And so we published that, and that, I think, poked Governor Newsom, because that was his long-standing narrative. But there just simply isn't any. And I challenged the governor. I said, well, if there truly is, then bring him to court. Mm-hmm. Bring them to court. Bring them to federal court. You got plenty of laws to bring them to court. And of course, the state attorney general won't bring them to court because there's no legal proof or economic proof of price gouging, and there's just a political narrative. But then you know, as we all know, what happened quickly after that, I mean, it's a matter of weeks after publishing that, Venecia, Valero's Venecia refinery closed down. And I took a look at that because I had been looking at refineries. And at one time, as we all know, we had 43 in the state, and now we're down to 7.
Right.
But I went, holy crap, if we lose that refinery, it's going to have a significant impact on pricing.
Hmm.
So we built a bunch of pricing models, and we said, well, by this time, 2026, because we published that in May of 2025, we're going
Right.
to have gasoline at $6.43 a gallon, going to 7.35 a gallon, and if there's any significant disruption to the supply chain, up to 8.43 a gallon. And well, here we are. I don't know, I see the average price across the state, but in my neighborhood where I buy gas, I paid $7.29 a gallon yesterday for my
Right.
premium. So, the prices today are in line with that model. They were predictable, and of course, it solicited quite a response from the governor when that study came out. But here we are. We're in the realities of California policy has brought us to this point.
Speaking of conflict, we are all aware of the conflict in Iran that has been unfolding over the past few months. And lo and behold, we saw prices spike across the country. But more than anywhere, it was felt in California. And then we see the engagement of Governor Newsom's X account and Governor Newsom railing against Chevron to the point of saying, well, go to Costco, don't go to Chevron, boycott Chevron, as if it was something that Chevron controlled. So speak a little bit about what you saw back in 25 with any disruption. And I'm going to imagine you were probably looking at the fact that California receives a quarter of its foreign imports through the Strait of Hormuz, but this was totally predictable. Talk about how you saw it then and how you see it now with the word of wars, or the war of words between Governor Newsom and Chevron.
Well, I've offered several times publicly to pay for a class at a good California community college in economics for the governor. I will clearly put that on my credit card and have him go because obviously he has an absence of understanding of how supply and demand works and things like that. So, but moving on, you know, we were as we know, as you've said many times on your podcasts, Michael, and in your writing, California was the number one producer of oil in the world at one time. We were the number one in the United States and the number one in the world and number one exporter. We
Hmm.
have more oil here than in Texas by most measurements today,
Hmm.
and we can be entirely energy independent. Yet there are no pipelines coming into the state. But we had a perfectly closed loop system in California where we had an oil, which is made by, geology, and
Hmm.
we had crude production, and we had refineries set up to take the California oil, and that fueled this incredible growth in California and California agriculture. But over the years, more and more regulation and economics have worked against the industry, and we've seen a prolific decline in in-state production, as you know, and then the loss of these refineries. So, Chevron's, I think, is doing an entirely appropriate thing. And what I mean by that, and I support their efforts, and I hope other major brands follow suit, is that they're trying to educate the public to the actual cost of gasoline in California. Our costs have always been higher.
Hmm.
However, in 2015, that differential between California and the United States really began to accelerate. Now, the
Right.
political narrative on that is, well, there was a fire in the Torrance refinery and the costs went up and they never came down. Well, that's not true. There was a fire, the costs went up, the costs did come down, but what really impacted the consumer was the full effect of cap and trade kicked
Right.
in 2015, and now you see it in cap and investment. So what Chevron has tried to do is simply educate the public to this, and they put on some wonderful banners
Hmm.
and saying, "Look, $1.25 of what you're paying per gallon is in state taxes and fees and environmental costs. It's a buck 25. And by the way, they go up automatically on July 1st, the beginning of the state's fiscal year. Now,
Right.
in addition to that, we pay 18 cents for the federal excise tax. But
Right.
California has the highest taxes. And if the price of crude went to zero, we would still have the highest price of gasoline in the country because we have the highest regulatory cost in the country. So
Yep.
what Chevron is trying to do is just simply educate the consumer to the dynamics without the politics. Now,
Mhm.
the governor's pointing out, don't go to a Chevron station. Well, what he's forgetting is, 93%, 90% of those Chevron stations are independently owned and operated.
Right.
They're small businesses.
Right.
They're owned by, most of them are mom and pop shops. Now you might
Right.
find somebody that has a company that owns a number of service stations or station retail outlets, but a lot of them, particularly friends of mine, they might own 3, 4, or 5 of them. They're
Right.
lucky to own that. A lot of these are independent operations. So by coming after the Chevron stations, the governor is actually coming against the individual entrepreneur and the small family businesses that own these stations. So I thought that was quite alarming. But again, it doesn't surprise me given the governor's woeful lack of understanding of economics and how this supply chain works and energy works in any economy, let alone California.
Mhm.
So Chevron's just bringing that out. And then on the point of price gouging, that's really interesting, and I hope consumers begin to understand this and it resonates with them. The best, almost always uniformly, the best a independent operator can make on a gallon of gasoline is somewhere between 12 and 15 cents.
Right.
That's net. They're gonna make, as you know, you've done the studies, I've done them, we've read the other studies. So if you and I own a gas station, Mike, just call it M&M's Chevron
Yeah.
station, all right? We're gonna make, 12 to 15 cents on a gallon of gas. And that's all we're gonna make. However,
Right.
the state of California makes 62 cents on the same gallon of gas,
That's right.
the same one in the state excise tax. So if we wanna really compare price gouging, then perhaps we should look at the relative net cash proceeds from the same gallon of gas sold.
Professor, you touched on the working class families and the entrepreneurs that own these stations that are really impacted by the propaganda war from the governor saying, don't visit these privately owned businesses. One of the things I've thought also on the campaign, but it'd be costly for these business owners to do is to physically add a ticker to the gas pump that shows California is taking these 62 cents a gallon and $1.25. So your total fill up, if you saw at the end of it, okay, I paid $130 to fill up. And if it physically said Sacramento just made $25, I feel like that would really, really slap it on people's foreheads that this is how this whole thing works.
Well, obviously, I think that's an excellent idea, and it would be more costly for the service station to do that, the retailer to do that. But perhaps we could energize the electorate to have that in a proposition,
Yeah.
where California has to disclose on every pump to the expense of the state and come out of the state's budget how much the state is getting on each gallon of gasoline sold. And you're absolutely right. If you're buying, 40 gallons of gasoline, well, you've just paid 60 cents on each of those gallons, and you're doing
Yep.
that week in and week out. And not everybody in California drives an EV
Right.
or a hybrid. There's a lot of folks, especially the folks where I live here in Pasadena. They're, I live in an area where we see the trades. There's
Mhm.
construction going on, and there's things going around homes. There's a lot of pickup trucks moving in and out of this area, and they're
Yep.
construction workers. They're people who are doing, you know, the yard work. They're doing
Right.
the construction work. They're doing, uh, contractor work for the city. And so these are all hardworking Californians. Not everybody lives in Montecito, on the coast of
Right.
Santa Barbara in a $6 million house. The two ladies, I'm a bachelor, the two ladies who come in, who help me with my home, uh, each Friday, they travel 27 miles to and from my home.
Yep.
And and I know how hard they work because they've showed me their schedule. Um, you know, I'm fortunate I can compensate them for the price of gasoline, and I do compensate them for the price of gasoline.
You're a good
Um,
man. Yeah, that's nice 'cause
right,
most people don't.
it's the right thing to do, right? It's
Right.
the right thing to do. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you know, when you look at these taxes in the state of California, when these prices go up and the taxes remain the same, it's a regressive tax structure on those who are the lower income, multiple job working families, and senior citizens or fixed income individuals. So it's a highly
Right.
aggressive, regressive tax structure that the state has in place, all in the name of environmental change. And may I add one thing? Because I get on this roll, right?
Yeah.
So we're paying, I don't know, 28 cents a gallon, 23 cents a gallon, depending on what number, how you
Right.
calculate it. It could be 45 cents a gallon for cap and investment,
Right.
which was formerly called cap and trade. Well, let's not forget that 25% of that, which is about 6 to 8 cents a gallon that we pay at the pump, that goes for the California High Speed Rail project. So
Exactly.
every gallon of gas that a person buys in the state of California, they're supporting the California High Speed Rail project and something called affordable housing and sustainable communities. Now we're
Yep.
not quite sure what that means, but
Right.
20% of that money gets collected, goes to that program at the pump, and we're paying for these
Right.
things.
Right.
And as you know, when I testified up in Sacramento, I asked, I said, well, help me understand how much have emissions been reduced by cap and trade funding of the high speed rail project?
Yeah. Crickets.
And crickets. Not only
Yeah.
crickets, they were leaving.
Right. Yeah. No, I've experienced the same
I
thing in Sacramento.
know you
I
have.
was I wasn't testifying in this case. I was in an energy committee meeting, but a landscaper testified and he said, "You're banning my lawnmower, my internal combustion tools that require gasoline to operate. I cannot afford electric tools, number 1. Number 2, they don't last all day. Number 3, I'm in favor of clean air, but I can't do my job." And of course, he's saying all of this in Spanish because he doesn't speak English, but
Right.
it just goes to that's one element that shutting down hardworking people that are members of our community. And then the other element that you and I always speak about and you touch on with the rail is where is the money going?
Right.
We see our exorbitantly high utility bills and gasoline bills, and nobody knows where this money is going. And it's just frustrating the hell out of people trying to figure out, well, I'm not going to leave the Golden State. It's the best place on earth for most of us that have grown up here. But why am I funding Sacramento? And one thing that I always tell people, well, they need to tax us at the pump because it funds all their special interests. We're paying, we're buying 14 billion gallons of gasoline a year in this state, more than any other state than
We
Texas, and it's
we
basically become a
froze.
slush fund for Sacramento.
Yeah. Well, think about this, right? Um, let's just take the state excise tax.
Mhm.
So 61.2 cents a gallon. It's going to go up automatically on July 1st. And by the way, for our listeners who may not know this, that state excise tax, which goes up automatically on July 1st, is not pegged to road usage. It's not pegged to gasoline consumptions. It's not pegged to emissions. It's not pegged to anything other than the California Consumer Price Index,
Right.
which runs higher than the national price index, by the way, by about 10 to 12% higher.
That's
So
a lot.
it's a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's going to go up, by that amount. Now, what happened a few years ago is one of the refineries in Northern California converted to renewable fuels.
Mhm.
Well, to do the renewable fuels, they're importing something like 5 million barrels of used cooking oil from China to make fuel.
Right.
But the economics have really turned against them, and that particular refinery is losing a ton of money.
Mhm.
So one of the ideas that Governor Newsom has come up with is let's subsidize them
Right.
in the form of a sustainable air fuel tax, sustainable air fuel.
Right.
Well, there's no real way of getting at that except through the state excise tax for the roads. So
Mhm.
there's some discussion of diverting 3 to 5 cents a gallon to sustainable air fuel.
Wow.
But but that reduces the amount of revenue available to maintain the roads in California, which are already ranked number
Which are
1
already
in
the
what
worst.
and I think 47th worst roads in the country. I
Yeah.
mean, so how does that reconcile other than it's again a climate agenda type initiative?
Mhm.
So that's kind of an interesting thing to take a look at, and I think that the Californians have to be more aware of this at this point because
Mhm.
these policies really are affecting their everyday lives.
Right.
And it's got to the point where it's no longer, well, it's just the government and I'm going to pay for it. It's, I have to make major trade-offs. Do I
Right.
do this or I do that? And
Yeah.
and that's becoming a significant burden for many, many Californians.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. Do I go to work or do I stay home and do chores around my house? What do I do with
Yeah,
my
what do I do?
time?
Right.
One question I wanted to ask on this notion of the global conflict. We've seen a couple of interesting stories break. Number one, the Jones Act waiver, which allows the movement of gasoline, jet fuel, diesel, crude from, let's call it, the Texas coast through the Panama Canal to California to save us from, I would assume, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but we might have seen that $8 number hit had it not been for the federal government waiving the Jones Act and allowing product to move to the coast of California. And then the second component of that I saw yesterday, that was just blew my mind, was the fact that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is now being drained to save the state of California. And it just goes to this. I get so saddened by the fact that this has to be such a political conversation, but this idea that Governor Newsom needs to fight Chevron is the same thing as Governor Newsom needs to fight President Trump, when in actuality, I haven't heard President Trump take any victory laps from saving us from fuel shortages. But I guess my short question to you is, would we have seen that $8 gasoline, and would we have seen the supply shortages had it not been for the Jones Act waivers and sending oil from the petroleum reserve to California?
Uh, yes to both of those. In my discussions with some of the folks in DC when I was asked about these things, I said, well, we probably it would be advisable to suspend the Jones Act so we could get finished fuels into California from the Gulf Coast refineries. That's number one. Number two, the refineries, our imports are down, our in-state production's down. It's a shame because we have these incredible reserves. We can be entirely self-sufficient, or mostly almost entirely self-sufficient, if we allow in-state production. Um, so what was surprising was the president releasing that amount of oil and
Mhm,
that oil being directed to California. That was a surprise to all of us. Nobody
mhm,
really saw that one coming. And then I think the third one that we have to be mindful of is that as the president mentioned yesterday in his cabinet meeting, California is essential,
right,
and they're taking a serious look at it in DC as the national defense and national security implications of California oil and gas policies, gasoline policies, refinery policies, and production policies on the entire security situation in the United States, and that's getting a serious look at.
right,
Um, but back to Chevron, this idea of branded versus unbranded gasoline, there was a true statement in that in that press release
yeah,
coming from the governor's office or in the CEC. Well, yeah, the gasoline is all made to a certain standard coming out of the refineries, but then it goes to a distributor unit or a mixing unit that makes it Chevron, that makes it Shell, that makes it Mobil, and these
right,
are these are ingredients that make that gasoline different and special. And
right,
there's irrefutable studies as to sort of things like Chevron's Synergy and Shell V-Power, and in particular, Chevron's Techron
right,
formulation and its positive impact on engine performance, emissions, and engine longevity.
Right.
And so to make that statement is just completely just devoid of knowledge. And actually, it's borderline ignorant and irresponsible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's much more nuanced than the PR campaign. As someone who's experienced an engine failure in my relatively young 90,000-mile GMC Sierra, I'm sensitive to that. I want to put premium products in my engine because I don't want to pay for another engine.
Yeah.
I've already had that issue, and I do regular oil changes. Now that was a manufacturing defect that's known with GMC, but to your point, there are benefits to running a
Yeah.
premium product in your engine for performance and
No, there
longevity.
are, and there's reasons why that, and of course the premium products command it costs money to develop those in R&D, and then you've got to mix them and blend them properly,
Mhm.
and it results in a higher consumer price. But there is compelling evidence that the branded versus unbranded, particularly those of what I call the big three, and that would be Chevron and Shell and Mobil, they have significantly better gasoline quality than you'll find, and it's uniform, relatively
Mhm.
uniform across the country, than you'll
Yeah,
find against the unbranded
right.
providers.
Professor Miche, thank you for coming on to the Unleashed California podcast. I'm sure this will not be the only appearance. We'll have you back many times as the situation unfolds. As we depart, are there any final words, maybe some hopeful words? I always like to end with some positivity, but you can say whatever you want. But what's the final message for those tuning in?
Oh, hey, first of all, thank you again, Mike, for having me. It's always terrific to be with you. It's a lot of fun. I think for our consumers and those tuning in, one, really understand that $1.25 a gallon is in regulatory costs. That's the first thing to understand. Number two, I think to understand is California policies restricting crude oil production has really constrained our ability to be independent and compromise not only our own economic security, but national security in the future. Three, you
Right.
can do something about it. Pay attention to the Chevron banners. They are trying to educate you. I'm not a lobbyist for Chevron in any way. I just happen to know their data is correct. And thirdly, be a smart voter.
That's right.
You know, get educated, be mindful, be a smart voter, question everything and verify it through three or four different data sources, because this is becoming a larger component of our daily lives. And it's becoming a larger component of discretionary income for many, many Californians. And so those are kind of my thoughts to summarize it. But I'll tell you, I always have fun working with you, Mike. So anytime you ask, I'll be happy to be here.
Likewise, no, it's great advice, and I'm stoked to be engaged with you all, and you guys are doing great things at the Marshall School and individually, and I think you're exactly right. Education is key, and folks can we post a lot of your work on energyandscience.com, so we're trying to amplify your message on our site as we grow as well. So thank you again for everything you're doing for our industry and for the people of California.
Well, likewise. Thanks for having me. It's always terrific, man. Anytime.
I want to thank you again for listening to the Unleashed California podcast. Special thanks to Professor Michael Mische, who's doing phenomenal work to educate not only his students at USC, but the people of California. Most importantly, I want to remind you, the listener, that this is not a left versus a right issue. This is not Newsom versus Chevron. This is not Newsom versus Trump. This is energy security, energy reliability, and most importantly for us, energy availability and reliability at an affordable price. And that's what we're about at Californians for Energy and Science, is teaching you what we can do to bring our state back to what's known as the golden state and golden times, rather than checking our bank accounts if we can afford to fill up our gas tanks. We want you to be informed about these issues in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way, and that's what we're about. Unfortunately, the politicians have politicized this to a point where we can't avoid certain news stories, but we're going to bring you the straight facts every single time. So don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to the Unleashed California podcast. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on YouTube, wherever you want to consume your content, we will meet you there, and we're excited to have you. We're only going to grow from here, so we're going to have many conversations about this gasoline crisis, but we also talk about the environment, about your utility rates, about how we can afford to live in the great state of California. And most importantly, it's brought to you by the people of California. Thank you for listening.